Hey everyone, welcome to Old Movies. My name is Paul Martinovich and it is hot in the UK. We're in the middle of a heat wave, maybe the end of a heat wave. Hopefully. It's that time of year when we all collectively discover that we as a country are built around things being at a very specific mild temperature. And if we're ever anywhere near either side of that, it makes life deeply uncomfortable. But nevertheless, how are you? Welcome back. Chris Ryan brought us in a lot of new listeners last week, so I hope you guys can stick around because as great as Chris is and was, we have loads more exciting guests coming up. Not least of which is this week's guest, the great Kim Newman, of course, one of the world's greatest minds when it comes to horror, science fiction, cult cinema, and specifically Dracula and his many different iterations across pop culture. So it is a great honor and a privilege to spend some time with Kim, picking his brain about everyone's favorite count, and specifically the 1931 Tod Browning Universal adaptation of Dracula, starring Bela Lugosi, which, as we'll discuss, is absolutely not the beginning of the story when it comes to Dracula adaptations, but is a fascinating film in the story of the character's lifespan. And it's also a film that's very near and dear to Kim's heart on a personal level. And the conversation we end up having is, I guess, about Dracula as IP, intellectual property. I guess it's kind of one of the most integral, important, interesting stories in the history of that as an idea, as regards to kind of who owns the rights to a character, and then how the depictions of that character will evolve and develop and take shape over time, depending on who is adapting him and how. And I was thinking it's good timing to be talking about this idea about IP because it's been on my mind this week. Kim in this episode credits Dracula as being the film that started it all for him after seeing it at a young age on television. And it sparked this lifelong interest in everything that he has gone on to make his career in. And I'm always a little envious of people who are able to cite this one perfect influence and to have it be, such a cool and meaningful film. Like, oh, that makes sense. Because that film for me was Joel Schumacher's Batman Forever, which, despite Jonathan Ross at the time claiming it to be the greatest film of all time in his review, a claim which, by the way, he subsequently said was a joke, but I'm telling you, I was there. It was 100% sincere when he said that. Despite that, I guess Batman Forever is not the sexiest origin story for me as a cineast. It's not exactly Scorsese watching La Strada at 13, is it? But it's true. And I'm sure I will discuss Batman Forever more on this podcast at some point. But that film's been on my mind recently because I am currently playing with my son the latest Lego Batman game, Legacy of the Dark Knight. And what the game attempts to do is knit together in its story all of the movie adaptations of Batman throughout the years into one coherent narrative. So it starts with the League of Shadows sequence from Batman Begins. Then it sort of goes to the chase scene from the Matt Reeves Batman, The Batman. Then it segues into a bit of the 1989 Batman first half plot while sprinkling in the Red Hood from the comics and the animated universe as well for good measure. So it's this amazing kind of remix collection. And me and my son have been anticipating this game for basically a year when it was first announced, because we clocked pretty early on there was a good intersection of our respective interests. But as time's gone on, I've come to realize that this game it's much more about me than it is him. And I think the tipping point maybe was when they released a trailer a few months back with a remixed version of Seal's Kiss from a Rose on the soundtrack, which was the big single from the Batman Forever soundtrack album back when that, was a thing. And I remember being not much older than my son and just becoming obsessed with that song and the accompanying video. It's a great song. So this sort of knowing inclusion of that song was like, if you'll forgive me, a bat signal to let me know that this was a game made by terminally online middle-aged Batman nerds, e.g. people just like me. And so it's kind of proved in the game itself, and there's all these amazing little Easter eggs and callbacks and deep cuts, both from within the Batman mythos itself and also a bunch of things that a 6-year-old isn't going to appreciate, like Taken and American Psycho and Risky Business and Limmy's Show and those weird Michael Caine lockdown tweets. And I've just been getting a huge amount of pleasure out of it. And this has given me pause, I think, I guess because I just can't enjoy things anymore without having to overanalyze them. But I was thinking I've completely divested from a lot of these big nerd culture franchises on film, despite, growing up as a teenager loving all this stuff. But things like superhero universes and Star Wars being the main ones. And in my head, the reason I did that was precisely because they just become too predicated on fan service at the expense of creating something new or something coherent. And yet here's this thing now, this game that's effectively this fan service machine, and I'm unambiguously loving it. So I've been thinking about why that is. And I think the medium makes a difference, obviously. So games, they have this emphasis on constant delight and discovery that films don't really have. And it's much easier, therefore, to pack in all these references and still have it feel like this meaningful experience than it is with a film where you're coming in theory, for this more coherent narrative and experience. And I think there's also still a prestige and a weight attached to movies, as much as that has been, somewhat denigrated in recent years with all the straight to streaming stuff and TV spin-offs. So when you're making a movie with that great power comes the supposedly great responsibility to not fuck it up. But what that's actually translated to is basically cowardice on behalf of the executives and certain creatives, frankly, to not do anything too unusual or too controversial. I think the backlash to The Last Jedi is one of the more meaningful things to have happened in cinema in the last few decades, and that it ensured that creative risks were just not going to be taken with something this big and important, these huge tentpole franchises again, because of this extremely vocal minority of people who were furious on the internet because there are people of color in it and their version of Luke Skywalker was too mean or whatever. I mean, personally, I don't even particularly like The Last Jedi, but that whole thing to me was just such a turnoff and so pathetic. And it's particularly frustrating because in other mediums and other sort of franchises, I guess, riffing around and developing your character and changing them around a few key elements is the kind of whole point of doing it. And you see this with Dracula, obviously, and you definitely see it with Batman, which is why this game is so delightful. I think it's a catalogue of nearly 70 years of pop culture history, more if you include the comic. And it acts as a celebration of wildly different creative approaches. So in there you have Tim Burton, Christopher Nolan, Frank Miller, Adam West, Matt Reeves, Joel Schumacher, Bruce Timm, Zack Snyder, the Arkham Asylum games that were developed by Rocksteady Studios. All of these creative people don't have anything in common whatsoever other than that they did a take on the Batman and it was their own take. So I think this is why, and this is how this kind of ties into my conversation with Kim on Dracula. This is why IP can be, that's a scary term, can be a good thing, because when it works best, it's essentially like a writing prompt. You give someone a very basic outline, a few bits of iconography, and then let them do whatever they want. And in both this conversation and in my conversation with Chris, we talked about what are going to be these stories that survive, that get passed down through the generations. Like, is Star Wars going to replace the legend of King Arthur? And I think what Dracula and Batman, and I guess the legend of King Arthur to an extent, both show is that the stories and the characters that people return to are the ones where the iteration and the variation are baked in, where you kind of know going in, you're going to get a different take than the one you got before. With Star Wars, I think in particular now, you're getting the same thing each time. It's going to look the same, sound the same, everyone's going to act the same, but it's going to be slightly worse, with the exception of Andor, which is the exception that proves the rule. So I guess like a good analogy is like when this legacy IP is done well, it's like a good remix or like a really good hip hop sample where it retains just enough of the original to remind you what you love about it while building it into something new. Or then in extreme cases like this Batman game, it's like a great mashup or collage like Paul's Boutique or the Grey Album. But when it's done badly, like Star Wars and some of the superhero stuff, they're like bad cover versions. And the other aspect of this, of course, and probably the main reason I'm having this weird emotional reaction to fucking Seal, is because I'm experiencing all of this again, all the stuff that was meaningful in my childhood through the eyes of my son. He's going through this with me, going through the game. He's asking me like where the references are from, what they mean. And we had the same thing playing the game Astrobot, which is on the surface this fun platformer, but it also contains decades of PlayStation history and legacy and its collectibles and its Easter eggs. And my son was asking me, who's that guy? Like, where's he from? And these dumb games that are facilitating this kind of hands across the generations experience for me and my son. And that's not nothing. You know, it reminds me of my dad showing me Thunderbirds when I was a kid and saying, hey, this meant a lot to me at your age. Maybe it will mean something to you. And it becoming this point of bonding. And of course, the people who make all this stuff are aware of this. And you could say it's ultimately quite cynical in the way it pushes those buttons. Like there's a reason why Thunderbirds got rebooted in the 90s when those kids who had watched that were old enough to have children of their own. In the same way, it's how Transformers and Turtles and Masters of the Universe and all this 80s stuff are still getting new versions now. But despite all that, it still doesn't mean that sitting down and enjoying Batman together isn't still this like beautiful, meaningful thing for a father and son to do. So I'm grateful for this Lego Batman game giving me the opportunity to do that. Anyway, thank you for indulging me on that review of Lego Batman. Booted it up, went on a Proustian reverie, highly recommended. Right, so up next is Kim Newman, one of the great film writers that I've been reading since I was old enough to read film criticism, genuinely. He wrote the book on horror films, literally, Nightmare Movies, which if you've ever sort of taken a vaguely academic interest in horror, you'll know is one of the first books to read, if not the first book. He's an ever-present on Blu-rays as a commentator because he just has this absolutely incredible wealth of knowledge to draw upon. And he's always really engaging to listen to. He's also the author of the highly successful Anno Dracula series, and his new novel, Model Actress Whatever, is out now. We do mention it in the discussion, but this was recorded quite a while ago, so some of the dates we give are a bit outdated, but it is out. It is available now. Also, word of warning, there are a few audio issues with this episode. Sorry about that. And also, I was looking after a dog while this was being recorded who was causing havoc in the background. So if you're watching the video version, that's why I look a little distracted at points, not because I'm not interested in what Kim is saying, but I think I've seamlessly edited out most of the worst of it. Okay, stay tuned after our chat because I'm going to remind you of some of the events that I have coming up. But now, without further ado, let's get to my chat with Kim Newman. Are you working on something at the moment? Have you got?
I'm in the middle of writing a novella.
Okay, and is that part of the Anno Dracula?
No, it's not.
Universal.
It's a follow-up to my Christmas ghost story, and it's called Mystery at Christmas, and it's about murder mysteries. Although I'm not entirely sure it is one. I think it's a ghost story about murder mysteries, but I'm still feeling my way through.
Sure. And I imagine that will be released around Christmas. I don't want to jump to conclusions.
Christmas, probably next Christmas. Because I've got a book out in a month, so that's this year's book.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
And the name of your new book is
Model Actress Whatever.
Oh wow! What is model actress whatever?
That is. Let's see, I've got a copy here.
See, if this was a more professional endeavor, I would have issued an advanced copy. I would have read it.
Right, yeah.
Wow, that's a very striking cover.
Yes, it is. It's a contemporary British-based fantasy with a kind of alternate history kind of superhero theme. It's about a girl who develops superpowers in her gap year while working as a soap opera actress.
Amazing. Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm always staggered at how much work you do, how much you manage to pack in.
Yeah, I feel lazy, me. You know, I feel that I'm really not doing as much as I could do. Yeah.
And yet you are this ever-present force in books, in the world of call them
Yeah.
DVDs to avoid confusing people who haven't
I,
yet
s-
upgraded
we,
to the world of
I
Blu-rays.
still see that turn up over and over again. It's the easiest thing to say, isn't it?
What's that? DVDs? Yeah.
DVD, yeah. Even though we're not even on Blu-rays anymore, are we? Yeah,
No, we're not.
yeah.
I mean, that's the thing that would just be complete gobbledygook for the man on the street.
Yeah, but also
Because
including
Blu-rays are.
people who buy them. Don't seem to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Blu-rays though have been around forever. There's a joke in Phoenix Nights where there's someone who sells porno films who they call Blu-ray, and that was like that's 25 years ago,
Yeah,
and yet.
yeah. It still feels. Yeah, but DVD caught on in a way Blu-ray didn't. Maybe it's something to do with just being letters.
Maybe. I think I have a theory that the PlayStations have a big role in these formats taking off because the PlayStation 2 was extremely important for DVDs, sort of getting a DVD player getting into a lot of households. And then the follow-up, the PlayStation 3 was not successful, which had Blu-ray. So I think that's a sort of underrated side of it. But nevertheless, thank you for coming on to this and sharing your wisdom, your knowledge. I started reading Empire in 1995 as a sort of precocious 10-year-old film fan, and I remember your Video Dungeon art. I'm pretty sure they were in those.
Yeah, no, actually I'm not even sure when the first one was, because obviously it wasn't in the very first Empire.
Which would have been sort of the late 80s, wouldn't it?
By the time the column started, and the first thing to reviewed was Michael Almereyda's The Eternal, so that would put it at around 1995, 1996.
Okay. Yeah, no, I remember that being a window into a world that I'm much more familiar with now, but at that age and at that time, just seems like this illicit, whole other illicit world that very much sort of influences. I work on this label Transmission now. That's the whole thing, really. It's the Video Dungeon ethos.
Cool.
But it was all about the titles, really, in those, particularly as I had no other frame of reference, seeing many titles with usually more words than your more respectable films had, film titles had, and lots of lurid details about blood and Amazonian women and etc. But there's it's interesting. I was revisiting your collected Video Dungeon reviews and noted there is an entire chapter dedicated to Frankenstein and Dracula, and I'm guessing that's just the films that were in that.
In fact, that book has very little crossover with the column because the format was so different. Yeah, no, that book mostly consists of the notes that I had made because the column's format kept changing and still keeps changing, but very few things where I could just take out the 100 words that I'd put in print. So most of the reviews in the book are like 300-400 words, and they were the notes that I made for those reviews plus random notes that I made on things, because I make notes on everything I see on the assumption that eventually I'm going to write about them, even though by now there must be some that I'll give up on, but it's really handy to have like a set of notes on things. I have actually reviewed films I can't consciously remember seeing.
Yeah, I was going to pick out a few, so I'll give you a slight advance warning of that. Yeah. I imagine there will be some that you will have memory holed either by just the passage of time or by on purpose.
Yeah.
So I mentioned this because I asked what film you would like to discuss, and you named a few, and one of them was Dracula, the 1931 adaptation by Tod Browning, first of the Universal horrors, and I just thought that would be a good one because it's a character so associated with you, and you mentioned in your book Nightmare Movies that it was a sort of defining experience watching that for the first time. Yeah. So what was that like? How did you encounter it for the first time?
Let's think. if I dig at this, I can probably find the actual date. It, I think, is somewhere in.
The
Yeah,
1970s.
it's November the 6th, 1970.
Okay.
And it was broadcast late at night on my local
Mm.
ITV station, which was Westward in Somerset. If you Weirdly, I've obviously mentioned this in print because if you look at Wikipedia, it will say that that was the first broadcast of a Universal horror film on UK television, which it wasn't. I know that I came in halfway through a series. They'd showed Frankenstein like a month earlier, but I think I hadn't nerved up to watch Frankenstein. It wasn't until Dracula that either I nerved up or my parents allowed me to stay up late enough to watch it.
Mm.
But certainly, whatever it was, that was the moment. I've likened it sometimes to that moment in the origin story of Batman, where the bat comes through the window while Bruce Wayne is sort of pondering what to do with his life. And I think
Mm.
that watching Dracula changed my life the way that bat changed Bruce Wayne's
Yeah.
life.
Well, a bat comes through the window in Dracula, of
Yeah,
course, as well.
that's right.
It's a
It's a
slightly
bat.
different.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
it's a scene. And actually, thinking about it, that comic came out in 1939, and probably the artist, who I imagine by then wasn't Bob Kane, although he signed it, probably Jerry Robinson. The bat he drew coming in through the French windows was exactly the bat from Dracula, because that's what the artist would have seen.
Mm. So it was purely by. It wasn't that at that point you hadn't read the book. You weren't really. It was just purely by chance that you encountered it,
Yeah,
because it
I
was.
mean, I'll put it in context. I was 11 years old then, and I think, like a lot of kids of my generation, I grew up surrounded by genre material, and maybe we're the first generation to have, as a child in the 60s, you have like Doctor Who and the Avengers and Thunderbirds and the Bond films, actually Batman, and the Beatles, and all this kind of pop culture stuff, which is still somehow current. All these years on, all these things are still things. Whereas I think previous generations, nobody is like rebooting Davy Crockett from the 1950s. Nobody wants to remake Gone with the Wind from the 1930s, and that was a huge cultural phenomenon.
Yeah, there are certain social, political.
Absolutely, there are,
Uh,
but there are, with quite a lot of 1960s things that have been successfully rebooted. But for some reason, the huge pop culture explosion of the 1960s has never stopped. All these things are still part of the conversation. So anyway, I was predisposed to, fantastical and even sort of spooky stuff, monsters. Um, but somehow horror, because in Britain horror was associated with the X certificate, it was something kids couldn't access. Whereas in America, horror was for kids. They showed monster movies at kiddie matinees. So this is that I only really discovered horror through Dracula at 11, and I think that the experience of watching that film sort of set me off on lots of things. I became a horror fan, I became a Dracula fan, but I also became somebody who instantly I sought out the book and read it, sort of within a month, I think. Um, and also, I became interested in films. I became interested in films, and in a kind of more than a casual way, more than just as a consumer. I became interested in film criticism. I think that the most influential book for me at the time was Carlos Clarence's Horror Movies, also published as an illustrated history of the horror film. And there were various other key books on horror cinema in the 1970s by David Perry and William K. Everson, Dennis Gifford. So all this stuff kind of floated around in my mind, and from that, so many directions I have pursued throughout my life and career can be
So,
traced back to that one screening of Dracula.
so are you able to kind of pinpoint what? I mean, obviously, you made it very clear it was an
Yeah,
incredibly meaningful thing that sent your
yeah,
life in a completely different
yeah.
direction. What it was about that, the film itself. I mean, were you scared by it? Do you remember that it is scaring you,
Not
or
particularly. I mean, and to give, I think one of the reasons why I came into this series like a month in is that I was nervous about being scared because horror films had this reputation, and I think also my parents were probably nervous about being scared, and certainly I remember from a few years earlier being utterly terrified by almost random things. Actually, I mean Doctor Who famously, but also I remember listening to a radio version of War of the Worlds, not the Orson Welles one. The BBC did one in the 60s that I was unable to get past episode 2 of because it gave me night terrors. And various other things would sort of, as a kid, would set me off. Somehow, actually watching horror films didn't. Um, and it was almost a surprise a couple of years later to find out that there were horror films that could still actually frighten me. I think that there is a coziness to classic horror, to Universal horror, Hammer horror, that probably now is wrapped up with nostalgia, and actually was then. I mean, these were old films when I saw them. It wasn't a bit until a bit later when I caught up with the films that were being made in the 1970s, the films I write about in Nightmare Movies, that I realized that horror was still like a living tradition, and it could actually upset you. And then I went through the 70s. I saw first run stuff like the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Carrie, Halloween, It's Alive, all these things. So I became familiar with the idea that horror should still be frightening and disturbing, and yeah, and that's something, an altar that I still worship at. I do think that looking back at Dracula in particular, I can see why it was considered frightening in the 1930s. Although you can find contemporary reviews that actually rather like newspaper reviews of all horror films all the time are very distant and ironic and say, oh, this wouldn't frighten a 3-year-old or whatever. Yeah, it's like,
yeah, I've seen some.
yeah,
I've seen some reviews that compare it
yeah,
unfavorably with the stage adaptation,
mm,
which was obviously is this huge
yeah. And
phenomenon and is a
and
massive part of the story of this film.
yeah, and that I think that um, uh, David Scow, the late scholar, wrote a really interesting book tracing Dracula as a property from the novel through to the two Universal films, because there's another one the same year, taking in Nosferatu, but also the theatre versions. I think in terms of the evolution of the Dracula we have, a lot of it is to do with the two different theatre versions. The West End one and the Broadway one are very different things, although they have overlaps.
Mm.
And there are things which to this day we associate with Dracula because of the theatre. The way Dracula dresses is how he dressed in the 1920s to visit somebody in a drawing room. That's why he's in that evening suit, which is ridiculous for hanging around in a castle or sleeping in a coffin or whatever. And he wears a cloak because of a bit of a special effect that could only be done on the stage, where he does a disappearing act, where he throws the cloak up as Van Helsing reaches for him, and Van Helsing comes away just holding the cloak because he's dropped through a trapdoor. But the fact is, Dracula wearing a cloak, actually like Batman wearing a cloak, is a thing now. It's like
It's part of the
it's
lore.
so associated. I find it really strange when they do versions of Dracula where he doesn't wear a cloak. Somehow
Mm.
it just seems wrong.
It's naked.
Yeah, There's in the novel. There's a whole section about how Dracula, before he comes to Britain, steals Jonathan Harker's clothes. So he walks around wearing kind of like English solicitor tweeds. I've only ever seen that done in one adaptation, and it doesn't work.
Can imagine.
Yeah.
I always thought. I mean, I was reading. I think I was reading a different book about this story of the journey from the book to the stage and to the screen, and it is just the most amazing story of, I guess, intellectual copyright. One of the
Yeah, I know,
earliest
it's fascinating.
battles.
And it's one of those things. I don't know. Are other people as interested as we are in stuff about like? I
Well,
mean,
we'll
it's
find
like,
out.
yeah,
I can
well,
look at the
yeah,
stats of
because
this episode
it's
when
like
people
because
just turn off.
I love stories about IP. It's like
Mm,
they, people say that they've got fatigue with I don't know, long running series like the Marvel movies or the Bond films. But I'm fascinated by the ins and outs of how things start with yeah, Ian Fleming wanting to buy a house in Jamaica, and that then becomes this whole big thing.
well,
Or Stanley scribbling on the back of a crisp packet.
yeah.
Maybe a hero who's blind, and then suddenly all these years later we still have Daredevil. That to me is an interesting part of the story. And Dracula, because he's a shapeshifter, is absolutely ideal for tracking the evolution of IP. And there was a big copyright battle about him. And the rights to Dracula are still kind of tangled a bit because of Universal, who at some point have claimed that they Dracula the novel is out of copyright, but Universal at some point have expressed the opinion that they own Dracula, the one-word title, which is why Bram Stoker's Dracula, the Coppola film, is called that.
Well, this is going to be particularly relevant very soon because this film goes into the public domain technically in January next year.
Yeah.
So there will be, I imagine, the rubber will hit the road with some of these conversations.
Yeah,
in due course.
I would imagine Universal will take some steps to reassert control over it. However, it's like what we've seen with the public domain stuff recently is like where people make really bad slasher movies based on Winnie the Pooh or Popeye or whatever. It's like you can't turn Dracula into a slasher movie because that's already been done.
Part of
It's
the DNA.
like and it's like what specific things from Universal would be suddenly available that aren't now, except probably the one-word title. And even then, they've only ever managed to assert that for films. I think it's for feature films. The Hammer film is called Horror of Dracula in America because it was distributed by Warner Brothers. But for instance, there have been various TV things called Dracula, and certainly the Cynthia Erivo play running in the West End at the moment is called Dracula. So it's like that's not a thing. But so what Universal own maybe stuff like at the Armadillo in Castle Dracula. I think other films have used that, or that little snatch of Tchaikovsky.
Yes, at the start.
At the beginning,
The one bit of music.
Which it is. It's like, I mean, actually, it was a Universal film recently, Abigail.
Yes, yeah.
Which uses that piece of music, which to me gives away the premise of the film. However, the trailer had already ruined it. I think Abigail started out as a reboot for Dracula's Daughter.
Well, there's quite a few films that are kind of stealthily Dracula adaptations. Aren't they? That's a whole sort of subgenre within itself. It's interesting you say about the IP. Like, I mean, you strike, just knowing your work, you're someone who is very much a completist and likes to watch every single version of something.
Yes.
And in the case of Dracula, so apparently in contention for the most on-screen appearances of a fictional character with Sherlock Holmes. But I was thinking, surely it's more Dracula is winning that battle at this point.
Yeah, I think so too. I mean, you know that on social media, I've been running a daily Dracula feature for
of course, yes,
nearly 5 years now, and there's no end in sight. And
Still many Draculas.
that's not just films.
Mm.
I've included pop videos and adverts and TikToks and people who videoed high school plays and all that kind of stuff. But even so, that's 5 uninterrupted years of Dracula. I
Hmm.
don't think I could do that with Sherlock Holmes. You
No,
could
I'm
probably
surprised it's
do
even
that
close.
if you include just every scene in which somebody puts on a deerstalker and waves a magnifying glass. But
Mm.
even then, I think Dracula has pipped Sherlock Holmes. Um,
And it's
uh,
specifically Dracula as well, not
yeah,
just vampire films.
no,
It is,
absolutely, yeah.
yeah.
There is a sort of sense that quite a lot of screen vampires are still basically Dracula. I don't think the vampire in Abigail you meet at the end has another name, but he's Dracula. I mean, it's obvious that he's supposed to be Dracula. Yeah, and I think that Count Yorga in the 1970s, or the guy in Fright Night, Jerry Dandridge,
Mm.
they are Dracula. Whereas others, the vampire Lestat or Edward Cullen or Carmilla, are vampires who define themselves by being not Dracula. Uh,
Mm.
I actually think the Count from Sesame Street is Dracula. Uh,
Well, he has the
yeah, he's
accent,
got the
obviously.
voice. It's like, and the title. It's like the things that make a screen vampire Dracula. I mean, I think the cloak and the title and the voice, a few other signifiers. So I have, and there's this whole other subset of vampires which are Nosferatu, and Nosferatu is
Hmm.
Dracula. So yeah, that's a whole
Yeah.
other craze.
I mean, you're talking about, well, mentioning about being a kid and your
Yeah,
first exposure to Dracula. I'm pretty sure that I was obsessed with Looney Tunes, and
yeah,
specifically the horror sort of
yeah.
inspired Looney Tunes, like the kind of portmanteau film Daffy Duck's Quackbusters was on heavy rotation in my as an 8-year-old, and yes, the vampire in that is clearly Bela Lugosi.
Yeah,
He's got the
from
accent.
Transylvania 65000, the Bugs Bunny cartoon.
Yes,
That
exactly.
character
That's
has
the one.
reappeared in a few cartoons and I think a video game. So
Mm,
that's a Dracula archetype that's owned by Warner's. But it's like every cartoon seems to have done Dracula. I found Dracula meeting the Flintstones, and Fonzie and the Happy Days gang met Dracula in a cartoon, let alone Scooby Doo. Yeah, I think the first Dracula I saw was on Doctor Who, which was a robot in a 1960s Dalek serial. But the second Dracula I saw was Peter Butterworth in Carry On Christmas. So
yeah,
they're all the numbers of Draculas are out there.
it's
It's like
astonishing. And
it,
there's been last year, like, there was the Raoul Jude Dracula.
mm,
There was another adaptation. There's a Luc Besson
that's right.
Dracula,
Yeah,
um,
and that's
both
not,
called Dracula. You
yeah,
know, not even
yeah.
a kind of
I think Radu Judah actually called it Radu Judah's Dracula as a joke about the Francis Coppola film.
he
Luke,
should have
Be-
called it.
Luke, yeah, Luke
He should have
Besson's
called it Rowdy
Dracula.
Jude's Bram Stoker's Dracula,
Yeah,
like
I know.
the Office
I,
joke, Michael Scott.
I
Yeah,
know. I actually think that it should have been Francis Ford Coppola's James V. Hart's Bram Stoker's Dracula, but
yeah. Why not?
yeah.
It
I'm
it's.
not a big fan of possessory credits. They screw up the alphabetizing of titles.
Mhm. Well, it's just it's amazing that he's got everywhere. Given that he being Dracula, given that so much of the story of this film is about intense legal battles over the
Yeah,
rights to
yeah,
use the name.
yeah,
So for people who aren't aware, I mean, people may be aware of obviously Nosferatu, which
yeah,
predates this film,
yeah.
which is an amazing story. You may be aware of it, being
Mm.
lost for years and Prince being destroyed, but the sheer sort of gumption of the German producers to just make it with absolutely no rights
The
whatsoever.
I suppose it was the 1920s. The idea of buying film rights had not quite established. Arthur Conan Doyle sold film rights to Sherlock Holmes in I think the 19 teens, and so and other authors who were around to make deals had started doing it. But I think the reason why F.W. Murnau didn't buy the rights or even try to buy the rights to Dracula is because he got away with it once before. He did a version of Jekyll and Hyde without paying Robert Louis Stevenson's widow. He changed it. He called it De Andera, which is a lost film. Bela Lugosi's in that, playing the butler.
Yes.
Where Conrad Veidt plays not Jekyll and Hyde, but somebody else and somebody else. And it tweaks the story just enough, but it is still basically the story of Jekyll and Hyde. And so that's what Nosferatu does. I think it is obviously a version of Dracula. I mean, it's so much of, and I noticed that
it's arguably more authentic than this
yeah,
one.
True. And when Robert Eggers made his version of Nosferatu, he quite honourably credited Bram Stoker with all the bits that are in there that he had to put back in to fill out a film. I mean, Robert Eggers' Nosferatu is the first major version of Dracula to have a Dracula who matches the description of the character in the book, which is astonishing after 120 years of these things.
Yeah. This was an interesting sort of discovery as well, sort of looking into this, where both Dracula the book was not the first example of vampire literature. Vampires were established, and vampires did have this kind of Byronic kind of thing where it's these handsome, seductive men, usually, or women. But Stoker chose to make him into this monstrous figure who sort of certainly has elements of perhaps slightly unsavory anti-Semitism or xenophobia there.
I'm not. The thing is, if Bram Stoker was anti-Semitic and wanted to create a Jewish villain, he could have done. Svengali, the character everybody remembers from Victorian literature, who is an anti-Semitic, a Jewish villain, is there. Fagin, even, although I think both of those characters are based on real people, which is how the authors sort of justified it. Dickens put in some good guy Jews in other books because he reacted to the criticism. I don't know about Du Maurier. I think Svengali is, and Svengali is still a great character, although undeniably an anti-Semitic stereotype. I think if Stoker had wanted Dracula to be Jewish, he could have made him. I don't think that there is actually a tradition of Jewish vampires that he could have drawn on. What he takes from Svengali is the hypnotic thing, and that's in most versions of vampire stories anyway.
Yeah, I mean it's staggering to see. I mean, so Orlok is the version of Dracula in Nosferatu. The kind of iconic image of him with the long fingers and creeping into the bedroom, and how completely opposed that is to the Lugosi depiction of the character, which does then revert to but the thing that was I found interesting was that I kind of assumed the film had kind of made that, but actually that's a change that happened within the stage play, where obviously Lugosi began. He played Dracula in the Broadway adaptation, but I think it was there was a West End and a Broadway adaptation.
Raymond Huntley was the British Dracula, who is like a character actor who's in stuff like Hammer's The Mummy and Billy Liar as an older man, and he played Dracula when he was in his early 20s, but made up to look old. And I think obviously that what they were trying to is the theatre that theatre adaptation of Dracula is a typical West End mystery play. It takes place in drawing rooms. It's full of people paying calls on each other, announced by maids reading out, which is why Dracula is dressed as if he's making a formal visit. Which, I mean, is an amusing enough notion, to be honest. But it then creates, and I think one of the things about Nosferatu, and it's a great look. I mean, again, people are still imitating the look of this 1922 film over 100 years later. But one of the things is that Max Schreck is in a silent film. He doesn't have to talk. And you can't do dialogue with those teeth in.
That's true.
And it's true about some of those great Lon Chaney makeups, the Phantom of the Opera. It's Lon Chaney's Phantom of the Opera is the best looking version of that character, but he couldn't have made a talkie because you couldn't talk through that thing. And certainly, you can argue that in a talkie you could dub it, although you couldn't in the early 30s. But on stage you can't. Yeah,
Mm.
yeah, and so Lugosi's look is something that someone could wear in a theatre and act through and talk through, and it's a thing about monster makeups that is true to this day. Sometimes the best makeups are impossible to act in. The ones that are really impressive, I think, for instance, obviously Jack Pierce's Frankenstein monster makeup, Karloff can still act through that.
Mm.
And the most remarkable one is John Hurt's makeup in The Elephant Man. He's still giving a performance that's recognizably John Hurt. Yeah,
Yeah.
and I think that yeah is a thing that helps these characters sort of latch into the onto public consciousness in a way that uh, yeah creatures that are just special effects or even creatures that are just
Mm.
CGI don't.
No, it's the Lugosi performance, as I said,
Mm.
through whether it's Looney Tunes
Yeah.
or whatever. It's very easy to parody, and that
Nobody
it's got
ever
its hooks in.
imitates Christopher Lee's voice as Dracula.
No.
It's a very strong performance, and Lee has kind of a
Mm.
distinctive voice, but it's
Yeah.
not, but somehow Lugosi's and even I mean Gary Oldman imitates Lugosi's voice.
Yeah, well, that was an interesting detail I read as well, that Christopher Lee was not a fan of Lugosi's performance, but
Yeah.
Oldman definitely clearly was,
Yeah,
because it
and actually,
heavily inspires his
and
performance.
Anthony Hopkins said that he was inspired by Lugosi for Hannibal Lecter as well. So but
Mm.
I think probably Gary Oldman's exactly my age, so I imagine he saw Dracula on television the same time I did, or whenever London ITV showed it.
Mm. Well, there's another interesting, I think, Lugosi connection. Another famous person to don the cloak was Martin Landau, who then,
Yeah,
of course, would play
that's right.
Lugosi
Yeah,
in Ed Wood.
yeah,
So, and they do physically resemble each other quite a
yeah.
lot, those two.
The yeah, Landau played it on stage. He also played a version of Dracula on The Man from U.N.C.L.E.,
Really?
which I'm the Batcave affair.
Wow. I love Martin Landau's TV appearances. I like his
Mm.
Columbo episode
Yeah,
where he
yeah,
plays twins.
yeah.
Yes, so yeah, the stage aspect, just keep coming back to it because the film does feel it's quite stagey, you know?
Mm,
It does retain that thing where it's in rooms, and it's very low budget.
mm,
It's shot in sequence. There's lots that
yeah,
happens off screen.
yeah.
Other than that kind of opening prologue where
Mm.
they go, Renfield in Transylvania, like it is that kind of drawing
Oh yeah,
room.
I mean, it's drawn from the play. I actually, there's a sort of truism about it that after the first 15 minutes, it just turns into a film stage play. I watched it again in order to do this, which is probably like the 20th time I've watched it or whatever. And it's not quite true. Carl Freund's camera keeps moving, even in the sort of drawing room scenes. And it's not showy movement, but he quite often sort of weaves in and out or
Creeping.
moves for emphasis. And there are, I think, after the first 15 minutes, which has the visit to Castle Dracula and the brides and the sea crossing and all the kind of the obvious dramatic stuff, and then some foggy London material. I still think the rest of the film has got a lot going for it.
Yeah, absolutely.
I
I mean,
particularly like Helen Chandler's performance as Mina. I think she's really interesting, and the moments where she's sort of semi-vampired at the end, and you see that she's lost the sense of humour she had earlier in the film, are actually quite chilling.
mm,
I think that a thing that is an issue is that Dracula dies off screen because at that point they just weren't set up to show somebody having a stake put through their heart or the
yeah.
dissolving stuff, and that it's inevitably a downer. Although it's not quite as undramatic as some critics have said. I mean, you see the stake raised, and then it cuts to the off-screen groan, but it does the thing which actually the Hammer film does as well. Of the emphasis is not on Dracula's death, but on Mina being freed from the spell of Dracula. It's all about her waking up after Dracula is dead and is not giving her, yeah,
It's
a
interesting.
hard time anymore.
The emphasis on her. I mean, there's in the many varied and extensive times of Dracula scholarship, there is this debate over whether the story of Dracula and its various iterations portrays women as these kind of,
Yeah.
harpy figures
Yeah.
who are, or whether in depending on the version, they sort of gain control and kind of agency as the film or story progresses. And this
Yeah,
feels one that's kind of,
certainly that's something that recent adaptations have stressed. The first person to have Mina kill Dracula was Orson Welles in a radio version, which Francis Coppola uses that as well. And in both cases, it's sort of a mercy killing.
And in the Eggers version as well, there's a version
actually,
of that.
no, I should rephrase that because in Murnau's film, the heroine kills Dracula, but in a passive way by keeping him up after his bedtime. Yeah, and so we do say that she did that, but also that means that Nosferatu, his Orlok, the most repulsive version of Dracula, dies for love, whereas most other Draculas are, toxic masculinity, aren't they? I mean, that's essentially.
That's a really good point.
The worst thing about Dracula is
the Lothario Dracula is not allowed to triumph in any way. He doesn't get any kind of heroic.
Yeah, although the last two stage versions the last three stage versions of Dracula I've seen have made Dracula almost as much a liberating figure as a monstrous one.
Why do you think that is? Why do you think that's?
I think because Dracula is inherently the most interesting person in the story, and so adaptations have tended to revolve around him. I don't think Bram Stoker intended that at all. I think Bram Stoker saw Dracula as a villain, and Dracula isn't in the novel all that much. He's a monstrous background presence. I also think that a thing that no adaptation has ever done, which is part of the novel, is that Dracula is useless as a villain. He's got this great speech about his days as a warlord when he was alive, and he's giving basically a Donald Trump account of a battle that he says, where he talks essentially about running away and leaving his men to be slaughtered by the enemy, and then he talks about this as if it's a great triumph for him, and it was important for him to survive and keep fighting, and so he's leaving his army to be destroyed. And that actually sets up the fact that Dracula runs away halfway through the book. It's like he has this great concerted campaign to invade Britain, but as soon as Van Helsing starts, putting bits of the host in his coffins, he's back in a crate and back to Transylvania.
So you're saying this is Daco, Dracula always chickens out.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a good one. I'll use that. But not only that, it's that he is a Victorian melodrama villain, which means that apart from anything else, he's got to be a braggart and a coward in the way that Tod Slaughter's characters are. And no screen Dracula has done that, except maybe Grandpa Munster.
Of course. I mean, it was seen at the time, again, the Dracula scholarship, it's seen Dracula as maybe being this quite a extensive, thorough representation of Victorian mores, right, and values of the time, and very representative of that.
And he is, I mean, he represents everything we're supposed to dislike about foreigners, I think.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was alluding to earlier with his.
I think, and I don't think it's so much an anti-Semitic stereotype as a xenophobic stereotype.
I think maybe the Orlok in Nosferatu, there's some imagery there that people have said that, but it's more in the book. It's just general distaste for not English people.
Except Stoker includes Americans and Dutchmen among the good guys. There are certain kinds of foreigners that are one of us.
Yeah.
And of course Stoker was an Irish Protestant living in London, so I think identification with Britishness is not uncomplicated.
Yeah. So the going back to the stage show again, because it is just this fascinating role in this. I mean, I found the accounts of the kind of early West End show, just how trashy it was, to be very interesting.
Yeah.
Like it was this real. It is, and drawing the line between that and the kind of horror. Not saying that they're trashy, but the kind of horror shows in the West End now, like Paranormal Activity and even Woman in Black and things.
Yeah,
There's this real
Dracula.
emphasis on jump scares
Yeah,
that isn't in the
Dracula
film.
is in the West End now for the first time
Of course, yeah.
since I think 1979. So yeah,
Have you seen this? Seen the
yes,
new
I have.
adaptation?
I think it's really interesting. But I'm now a Dracula completist. I'm booked to see the ballet at Sadler's Wells in a couple of weeks.
Yeah. I mean, this is representative of how it's just you cannot escape.
And
just
I
more
saw,
food for daily Dracula.
Yeah, and I saw Dracapella, a kind of musical a cappella comedy version at the Finsbury Park Theatre. So yeah, I will keep on this. The 1920 stage Dracula, I suppose at the time there was this run of plays, things like The Cat and the Canary and The Bat and Edgar Wallace's plays, which all the critics of the time sort of scorned, the way that film critics scorned popular horror films. But they had gimmicks. They had that thing of there's a nurse in attendance in case anybody faints and all this sort of stuff. There's a great story, I think, on some anniversary of it's like for the 5th year it running or the 100th performance or something. The audience were given copies of Dracula's Guest, the short story collection, and when they opened it, there was a spring-loaded bat that punched out, so the whole audience would have had bats flying around, all this stuff.
Real William Castle kind of.
I know. I think the theatre could do with more of that stuff now.
More gimmicks. Yeah. No, absolutely. So there's the stage adaptation. There's Nosferatu, which very much upsets Florence Stoker, Bram Stoker's widow, who demands that it be destroyed entirely. Which is a really interesting. It's tough because they were definitely in the wrong in taking this work completely. But the idea of destroying this film, which is now arguably the most critically sort of venerated film.
And I don't think she ever saw it. To her, it was an encroachment on her income. That was the only thing she saw about it. She saw, and I've got to say, as a creative artist in the era, I'm waiting for my anthropic settlement as we're recording this. The money that I get from some huge lawsuit in America about my work being plagiarized for AI, and obviously I'm expecting pennies to turn up through this. And had I been given the choice, I would have said, don't steal all my work and use it to feed a giant plagiarism machine. I can absolutely understand how Florence Stoker felt about
particularly that. Because the Stokers weren't, they sort of operated in high society with their associations. Like he was manager of the Lyceum Theatre, and who's Henry Irving, the Shakespearean actor. But they themselves were not, they didn't come from
they were
money.
They were essentially they were upper middle class.
But maybe they did that.
But for instance, Stoker did not earn as much from his writing as, say, Arthur Conan Doyle or H.G. Wells or Robert Louis Stevenson. Thing is, those people concentrated on being writers. Stoker, being a writer, was like his second or third job.
Yeah, he had a lot of side hustles that he was working on.
I mean, it's hard to understand that. Dracula wasn't even the best-selling horror novel of 1897. That was a book called The Beetle by Richard Marsh, which is really fascinating, but is not obviously being done as a one-woman show by Cynthia Erivo at the moment.
No, well, that's the thing. It seems like looking into this, that it really was the play that
Yeah,
started the ball rolling of it being
yeah.
this
And
phenomenon.
I think
Like
it was a book that sold well, but it was
Mm,
not a bestseller.
no.
It, I think it may have gone out of print a bit before the 1920s, but it's been in print ever since the play opened. And yeah, the
Mm,
play is what turned Dracula into a franchise, into a multimedia blockbuster, which it remains to this day.
mm.
Um,
Yeah, so Nosferatu comes and makes certainly makes an impression, despite Florence Stoker's best efforts to stop it from being seen by anyone. The book I was reading, she seems to be in constant dialogue with the head of the Society of Authors for
yeah,
about 3
yeah,
decades,
yeah,
who's getting a man who's getting increasingly exasperated with her, but she's
yeah,
incredibly tenacious in sort of
yeah.
fighting that she has this moral right to earn money from this work, which I
Mm,
think is fair to
yeah.
say she does.
Which, I mean, it's still an issue.
Mm,
It's not so long since the Green Party decreed that their policy was that copyright on published work should lapse after 14 years,
mm,
um, which would wipe out the profession of author. I think they've rolled
mm,
back on that, but it's one of several
yeah,
things that they've thrown out as ideas that are obviously um,
a little
you know,
misguided.
well intentioned, but because
Mhm,
nobody has actually told them what it means for people.
yeah. So when Universal
Yeah.
come to buy the film rights, they sort of unwittingly wander into this mess and end up having to buy the rights to the book
Mm,
and the 2 stage actually 3 there was a sort of vanity project stage
that's
adaptation as
right.
well.
Yeah, and there are a bunch of other things. And David O. Selznick bought the rights to Dracula's Guest, the short story, which
Mm.
meant that he ends up with a credit on Dracula's Daughter, which is notionally based on Dracula's Guest. So
That being the sort of
yeah,
theoretical sprat to catch the mackerel.
that's right. But also
Yeah.
at this time, it happened with other authors did similar things where I think the last instance of this was Thomas Harris, but it's like Edgar Rice Burroughs sold the Tarzan books individually rather than as a series. So you have lots of different screen Tarzans competing with each other in the way that Thomas Harris sold Red Dragon and Silence of the Lambs to different people,
Mm,
which led to a rights kerfuffle. I think since then that's not happened.
mm.
People, the industry has learned better than that. But you do. I mean, actually, no. Come to think of it, there was that position where um, the the Marvel films had to have the Scarlet Witch not be Magneto's daughter because they didn't own Magneto because 20th Century Fox did.
Mm.
And
Yeah.
maybe comics are like the last form of this sort of IP that can be scattered to the winds. Yeah,
Yeah, with the added wrinkle with comics, of course, that there's
yeah.
disputes about who actually created
That's
them. I mean,
right.
there's no
Yeah,
dispute about Stoker being, the
yeah.
creator of
No,
Dracula.
yeah. Uh, I I once heard somebody address the notion that possibly he didn't write all of it. Um, it
Mm,
the novel's dedicated to somebody called Hall Caine, who's a forgotten author now, but was actually a more important author than Stoker. He wrote a book called The Manx Man, which is a silent Hitchcock film. So he was a brand name. And I have heard it suggested that he may have written chunks of Dracula, but I think that's a bit along the lines of those people who wish Shakespeare,
I
who
was
wish
going to
like a lower
say,
middle class guy was not the greatest poet in English literature,
mhm,
so it must be some posh bloke.
yeah.
And I think it's that no, it couldn't be that some guy who wasn't a proper novelist just accidentally created the defining franchise of horror. It must have been a real writer.
The literary landscape that Stoker was in, it's
Yeah.
quite interesting reading about that, where
Mm,
he wasn't a successful novelist and he kind of needed a hit. And that
mm,
was the impulse behind Dracula, not to sort of
mm.
nothing beyond. He just wanted to make some money for his family, and it kind of reminded me of the Stephen King writing Carrie, where his back his back's against the wall, and then comes out with this landmark work of horror. But then he's also competing with Oscar Wilde at the time, who apparently was also rival for Florence Stoker's affections.
That's right. Yeah.
This amazing. He seemed very put upon. He seemed like carried the weight of the world on his shoulders.
Yeah,
Bram Stoker.
I think he obviously was one of those people who knew everybody. I think maybe that part of the job of being like a business manager for a West End theatre would have involved meeting lots and lots of people. And he was well connected with the great and the good, and movers and shakers, and the politics of the time, the celebrity of the time. I wonder if that feeds into Dracula. It's an insider's book in some ways. I'm not entirely sure if that's really a good thing for an author to be. But yeah, and there are plenty of authors who sort of fit into that now. But I think maybe having a certain distance from the world probably helped.
So moving on to the film and the adaptation. So the adaptation was given initially to Louis Bromfield, who was very much sort of heavyweight literary figure who'd won the Pulitzer. And he adapted it, and I think he came up with because he was tasked effectively with pulling in bits of all these different adaptations. He came up with the idea of having the character Dracula sort of change in appearance. And then he got replaced by, what was it? His name's
John L. Balderston Garrett Ford.
Garrett Ford, yeah.
I think other people had worked on it as well. I think one of the things it does, the play makes some changes, which the film changes back. The play, for no reason at all, swaps the names Lucy and Mina, which has occasionally been done. The Frank Langella film, which is also based on that play, goes and does the same thing. The big thing that the film does, which is unique, I think, to it, is swaps out Renfield for Jonathan Harker in the first act. It's Renfield who visits Dracula's castle, and that. But it's one of those things. That's a really clever adapter's move. It explains why Renfield is mad. It explains why Renfield has a connection with Dracula. Unfortunately, it makes Jonathan Harker kind of useless in narrative terms.
I would going to say my favourite part of this film is Renfield, and Dwight Frye's performance as Renfield is truly committed performance.
Absolutely. I have to say, I think even more than Lugosi, it's the performance that it's got that perfect mix of being kind of farcically strange but actually horrifying. I think his laugh is painful, isn't it? It goes beyond something that's a joke to being something that actually really hurts. He seems to be the character who suffers most in the film. So that makes him our identification figure, which is unlike the novel, where our identification figure is a staunch, upright guy who, in the end, fights back and wins. Our identification figure in the film goes mad, eats flies, and has his back broken in the climax.
Yeah,
He is the through line of the film.
Yeah. It's a very genuine depiction of madness and committed, and it's another interesting sort of element of the film is it coming at this time when talkies were extremely new, and from a filmmaker, Tod Browning, who'd worked extensively in silent cinema, and it feels. I mean, this was also released as a silent version.
Yeah, I think that may well be a lost version. I've never seen the silent Dracula, but then again, apart from Blackmail, the Hitchcock film, it seems to me that the silent versions of films made from 1927 to whenever they stopped doing it, probably 1932-ish, it's like, because there would still have been many cinemas that did not convert to sound until quite late. So silent versions of the Public Enemy and whatever would have been prepared until God knows when they gave up on it.
They don't
Finally,
have the
yeah,
install base, they'd call it, would they,
yeah,
of
that's right,
sound,
yeah.
sound
Uh,
equipment?
so there would have been silent versions of almost all early 1930s
Mm.
films. But let's say the Dracula version, like all of them, seems to have gone by the wayside. God knows what it was like.
Yeah,
Uh,
that's one of the things that really struck me watching it is, thinking about what you said earlier about feeling quite cozy. I mean, it's a very quiet. It's a contradiction in that it's a very, very quiet film, and it is quite talky. Like, it's a lot of
mm,
talking in rooms, but yet in between the talking, it's complete silence because there's no score.
yeah.
And that, it occupying this space is this new, one of the probably one of the first talkies many people saw,
Mm,
and yet
mm,
it's very quiet. There's long
yeah.
period stretches
I
of
think
silence.
the one of the things that impresses me about the the film is its moments of stillness. It's the scenes in Dracula's castle with the brides who are non-speaking characters. In the novel, they talk quite a bit, but obviously Universal made a decision to have these wraith-like figures in the background, um, and just the the bits of Lugosi standing and staring, and sort of exerting his will on people with those glowing eyes. Um, that it, again, it's something that sort of it's sold by the acting. Uh,
Yeah, and the close-ups as well, like Browning's use of extreme close-ups, particularly with Lugosi, very effective. Are you, I mean, Browning, his work with Lon Chaney,
mm,
he had this amazing partnership, like one of the
mm,
real commercially,
yeah,
like, viable partnerships, I guess,
mm,
of the
yeah.
20s silent cinema, and it was
It
assumed that when Browning got the rights
yeah,
that Chaney
yeah,
would take
and
on the
it
role.
except if Universal had Dracula and Chaney had been with Universal, he'd gone to MGM. It's possible that Universal thought that Chaney would be lured back by the plum of Dracula.
Mhm.
But Universal had already replaced Chaney with Conrad Veidt in The Man Who Laughs. And I wouldn't have. Again, I think one of the interesting sort of alternative castings would have been Conrad Veidt, who would have
Mm,
been perfect as Dracula. At the
mm.
time, he would have been a bigger star than Lugosi. Also, I think he could have given a brilliant performance as Dracula. But I think he was in Britain at the time it was made, and so he didn't seriously get considered for the part. Lugosi only got the part after everybody else had failed because he
Mhm.
played it on Broadway. It was like a last choice.
Yeah, he sort of
Um,
just hung out and
yeah, I think probably the fact that it was a project intended for a big star who then died
mhm.
may well have put other people off doing it. There were
Do
also,
you
I
think
think,
because of superstitious reasons or just,
just the thought
filling
you
in
didn't want
shoes?
you
Yeah.
well it's you didn't want to be compared with a
No.
screen legend. It's like I doubt if anybody would have wanted to play um you know Rudolph Valentino's next film after
Mhm.
he died.
Sure.
Paul Newman actually did play the film that James Dean was supposed to be doing next, and got away with it, but
Paul Newman.
he was Paul
Yeah.
Newman. Yeah.
Yeah.
I I think it would have been more the thought that there was some. Yeah, you didn't. Lon Chaney was one of those unrepeatable characters that people thought they didn't want to compete with. And if you look at um, the the fan writing about the first wave of horror films, it's full of you know. Is Lugosi the new Lon Chaney, and then is Boris Karloff the new Lon Chaney? It seemed people wanted a new Lon Chaney. Um, I I actually don't think that either of those actors were actors like Chaney. I think they had other personalities and a different approach to screen acting. But again, Chaney dying young, yeah,
Yeah.
or dying at the height of his stardom, probably changed the way um, cinema was going. I think Yeah, he would almost certainly have, copped a lot of lead roles in the 30s that other actors made careers out of,
Mm.
and Dracula is one of those.
It's interesting that Conrad Veidt kind of he was this huge silent star and then kind of went away for the start of talkies for a little bit and then came back and had this sort of second life as, uh, playing villains in war films.
Yeah, well, he
Um,
was a bit of a matinee idol in Britain. He made a bunch of British films, like The
mm,
Passing of the Third Floor Back, The Wandering Jew, The Spy in Black. Yeah, and I think he was sort of one of those people who just had movie star charisma or whatever. He
mhm.
also died relatively young. Uh,
Yeah, as did Dwight Fry, I saw,
yeah,
who
yeah,
plays Renfield, and I
yeah.
also listened to Alice Cooper's tribute to him,
Yes, yeah, yeah.
"Ballad of Dwight
Which
Fry."
which probably kept his name before the public.
Mm,
When Alice Cooper made that record, it was kind of like, who is Dwight Fry?
yeah, and there was no Wikipedia then for people to
That's
check. It was
right.
just
In fact, as a kid in the 70s, when that record came out, I knew who Dwight Fry was. Yeah.
yeah,
I don't
but
know
if
if that's a
others no.
representative of people who bought those records.
No, I'm gonna guess that your knowledge of, Dracula, lore and history
Yeah.
was higher than most even then.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, but then again, it was like it was already a subject that was starting to attract interest. But in the 1970s, when I was a teenager, I there was a steady flow of people writing books about Dracula or vampires or Bram Stoker, all of which must have been relatively successful because still own them in paperback. And they weren't things that you had to get from specialist bookshops. I think they were all bought in the local mitts. Yeah, so they were all. There was an interest. It
mm,
wasn't like a mainstream interest, but it was growing. I
yeah.
think it's never gone away entirely.
Well, that's the thing, seemed like it was slow to take off the commercial success of Dracula. No, it did okay, but
Mm.
to become the phenomenon, but once it did, and with this stage play, it just has never let
Yeah,
up since
yeah.
in
I mean, it's
100
been
years.
it. Yeah, and I think that there are properties like that. I would say, obviously Sherlock Holmes, but or Frankenstein, or the Three Musketeers, or whatever. They're going to keep doing those every couple of years
The
forever,
Wizard of
aren't they?
Oz
Yeah.
was the
Um,
new yeah.
but there are a couple of things that had runs, as they Gone with the Wind, or
Mm,
Tarzan. I think that's over. Um,
yeah.
and and yet there was a Disney cartoon. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So
Is that a
it was
Phil
it.
Collins one? I feel like it might be.
That's right. Yeah. So it lasted quite a long time before the basic premise became insupportable. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, which I think, and the Alexander Skarsgård did a film like 10 years ago that didn't do any business. And that was like the end of Tarzan as
Mm,
a Universal IP.
mm.
And I think a few other things have dipped in and out. I think Agatha Christie is now back on the map as someone whose works are going to be kept, going forever. But there
Yeah.
was a point where she could have slipped into the backlist where I don't know Edgar Wallace lives,
Yeah.
or all these people who were huge and have got. I mean, I'm fascinated by the graveyard of popular culture.
Mm.
Things that were massive and then weren't. Things that
Yeah.
you
Most
wouldn't think would survive but have.
Well, most things do have these cycles where they go away
Mm.
and then come back around. Like, it was interesting to
Yeah.
see that working on various films in this genre, like just how big hard-boiled fiction was in Hollywood in the early 90s and late
Mm.
80s. It had this real moment where, um, like Donald Westlake and Jim
Yeah.
Thompson, and they
Yeah.
were all huge, and then it sort of died off, and then it's sort of come back since. It's very few things that just sustain this level of interest and popularity
Mm.
for 100 years, and this
Yeah.
is Dracula is one of those.
Mm.
Um, I was gonna, ask actually, I did allude to this, earlier, but in your book, Video Dungeons, there
Mhm.
are, the Video Dungeon reviews. There are a lot of Dracula, films. and I was going to just read out some titles and just
Yeah,
see
sure, yeah.
if you had any memories of them and anything, because there are. I think I've looked on the various aggregating sites like Letterboxd and IMDb, and
Yeah.
there are, in terms of films, again, not vampire films, but films that feature Dracula in
Yeah.
some way. It's got to be approaching like 200 or something at this point.
Yeah,
Like, it's a crazy.
there is actually on my website. I've actually put an archive of Your Daily Dracula, so you've got the list
Okay,
there. Which,
good.
of course, it's not complete because I'm still doing it. But I
I
think
mean,
it
it's a
has.
full-time job.
Yeah, it would be. Right. And for instance, I have not yet covered the Japanese Sailor Moon meets Dracula musicals because there's 12 hours of that. It's like,
Right.
and
Is that
I
live
have
action
not
or
had the
anime
time.
or?
It was stage productions that were filmed.
Oh, right. Okay.
So huge, like stadium rock stage shows.
Goodness.
Yeah, exactly. But I've not had the 12 hours spare to watch them. And I do try and watch these things before I post the stuff.
Yeah.
So
Have you heard
that's
any word of its quality? I mean, I know Sailor Moon is a very, very
it's a huge thing that
fervent fan
I
base.
really don't know much about.
Yeah.
But when I get round to that, yeah, I will
Mhm.
learn more about it.
And by the rules of your own self-imposed rules of Daily Dracula, will you only get one post out of that or several?
Well, there are 4 linked plays, so it'll be 4 posts. I may run it
Okay.
over a week. Yeah,
Okay. So 3 hours per post.
yeah, exactly. Yeah,
It's okay, I guess. All right. So that's a few of the titles I picked out here.
yeah,
First one, Defula.
yeah.
Do you recall this film?
Absolutely, yeah, yeah.
So this is,
It's Dracula in sign language. Yeah,
yeah. So this was a deaf filmmaker
yeah,
who decided to
yeah,
adapt it for a harder hearing audience, and
yeah.
this is like the sort of
Absolutely.
70s.
Yeah.
Um,
It's obviously it's kind of inexpensive,
yeah.
which is to say, yeah, really, really cheap.
Mm.
Um, see, I'm looking at it. It's 1975.
It also had the alternate title Young Defula,
Yeah,
which
yeah.
sort of puts it of a piece with Young Frankenstein, which was out around the same time.
That's right. I seem to remember that he does a sort of weird thing with the sign language, which I think is trying to approximate Lugosi's accent, or if not his accent, the fact that Lugosi makes gestures as
Mm.
Dracula, and so
Yeah,
the guy playing the Dracula character does a lot of that waving the hands, not just in talking
gesticulating.
but in acting through that. So yeah,
Mm.
it is a thing. Yeah.
Yeah. How about Die Hard Dracula?
I
Uh,
have seen that. It's terrible. Yeah.
I mean, that's the
Well,
thing. A lot of these are terrible. Do
yeah,
appear, and I haven't seen them
absolutely.
either.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
I mean, you said that in your review, this looks and sounds like shot on video porn, but
Yeah,
it's not. Uh,
yeah.
but that there are
There are
many,
many, many. Yeah,
include including
yeah,
Dracula Exotica,
yeah.
aka Love at First Gulp.
Yeah, that's actually not a bad one as Dracula porn goes. I have to
Yep.
say, that is a slight exception to my I will watch all this stuff before posting it. I tend
Mm,
to, it's like you've become a sad person when you
mhm.
watch a porn movie by fast forwarding through the sex scenes to get to the
Yeah.
plot and the talking, to get to the scenes of Dracula with clothes on.
So another one that I thought was interesting was Hanno Cambiato Faccia.
Oh, I love
They've
that
changed
movie.
their face, which is
Yeah.
really
I'm,
interesting. That
I've got to say, yeah, it's one of the more unusual adaptations of Dracula.
mm, it's quite
And
subtle. I was going to say it's quite
yeah,
subtle, but then
yeah,
the main character is called Engineer Nosferatu, so it's not
that's right.
that
Yeah,
subtle.
yeah, it's
Um,
a
it
dog
has a
called
sort of
Charlie.
like texture of a sort of political thriller, but
Yeah,
very clearly.
and it has the wolf pack of Volkswagens, which is like really creepy.
Mhm,
And it's one of those. I suppose officially it's a political satire, but it's as creepy as it is funny.
mm. It's a really
I think
unusual film.
I've not actually seen Radu Judas Dracula, although I have ordered a copy. Um, so expect that as a Your Daily Dracula relatively soon.
Of course.
And I think that is it seems to me that's taking a they've changed faces approach, isn't it? It's using Dracula for all kinds of satirical purposes and as a recognizable figure. I think, and actually uh, the villain of Jean-Luc Godard's Alphaville is called Nosferatu as well, and is played by Howard Vernon, who played Dracula in Jesus Franco movies.
Yeah, is the Gerard Jude one the one that has AI? It uses AI as a sort
I
of.
think it does, but apparently
Yeah,
that's a joke. What it does is it uses
that's what I.
as it
Yeah,
were, human created material that's supposed to look as bad as AI.
yeah. I assumed it was a sort of like in the same way that people like Conor O'Malley use it as a sort of comment on this parasitic kind of culture,
Yeah,
and not just doing it because they couldn't be bothered and lack the creativity or willingness to pay people for their creativity. But as neither of us have seen it, I guess we've
yeah,
probably
right.
got best to talk about it.
Let's say keep an eye open. It will be,
Okay.
when I run a film as Your Daily Dracula, I try and post at least some notes or a review. So I will be covering that eventually.
Okay.
Yeah.
We'll look forward to that. So I guess I have to ask, and it may be a difficult question. I mean, what's interesting about this film is that clearly you said this is the film that started it all for you. But then I
Yeah.
saw a quote from you about Nosferatu saying this is the film that started the horror movie, if I'm paraphrasing, but like this
I think,
this
yeah.
produced the sort of framework for the horror film. So
Yeah.
is this a sort of head and a heart thing with you with these two? Or
Yeah.
is it
Oh, absolutely. I think objectively Nosferatu is the better film, but I kind of love Dracula more for personal reasons. I mean, I'd happily watch both in a double bill. It's like, and I say there are. Oh, I like the Terence Fisher Hammer film as well. Yeah, that strikes me, and the Louis Jourdan BBC TV movie, and all kinds of other weird
well, yeah, I mean
mutations.
you've seen them all, so
Yeah,
yeah.
that's right. So
So it stands
I
to reason some of more than a couple of them would
yeah,
have entertained you along the
that's
way.
right. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there are plenty I don't like. Yeah, but hey, I even found value in Luc Besson's film, which I know has been generally scorned.
Is your enjoyment of them, how wedded is it to the the performance and the actor playing Dracula? Is it
I remember when Coppola announced he was going to do Dracula, he said that the first thing he had to crack was the casting. He says, because if you make a Dracula movie and the word out is not that the guy playing Dracula is amazing, not a problem.
yeah.
And I think
It's
that is true. Absolutely. It is still, it's one of the great roles, isn't it? I've talked to actors who have played it, and they've all said, yeah, when the offer comes in, you sort of think, yeah, I would like this on my list of things I have done.
I guess, yeah, Batman has become Dracula to an extent, but
Yeah.
it is absolutely an iconic role.
But
So
it is odd to think that it used to be that actors all wanted to be Hamlet or Oedipus or whatever it is now. There are actors growing up who want to be Batman or Dracula or I suppose Sherlock Holmes has always been a plum role.
It's funny though, because I mean, Dracula is not the most complicated role. I mean, with Batman, you have the dual personality. You have that's a sort of challenge for the actor, whereas Dracula is pretty straightforwardly evil.
And quite often, Dracula is not the best role in adaptations of Dracula.
No.
Quite often, Renfield or Van Helsing.
Absolutely.
I think I mean, I just mildly off topic. I'm consulting at the moment for a theatre group who are doing a version of Carmilla, which is mashed up with Dracula. And I was watching their sort of workshop version. And it struck me that there the most interesting character is Lucy. And I'm realizing that in quite a lot of versions of Dracula, Lucy is the most interesting character.
She's the heart
because
of everything.
She has the arc. Yeah, she goes from being vibrant love interest to invalid to vampire. And that and there are, and it's not always she's not always called Lucy, but that character appears in so many Dracula movies that it's become Barbara Shelley plays it in Dracula, Prince of Darkness. Yeah, it's one of the most interesting roles.
I'm just thinking how funny it is that Coppola says that it's so important to nail the casting for your Dracula film when Keanu Reeves plays Jonathan Harker, probably one of the most miscast. I love Keanu Reeves so much, but good God.
I know. The thing I've always felt about that, and I'm not a huge fan of that movie, although I like some of it, is that, people gave Keanu Reeves a hard time about his English accent. But you know what? Gary Oldman's Romanian and Anthony Hopkins Dutch.
Yeah.
And both of those are Academy Award-winning, officially great actors. Right?
That's very true. I don't have the ear for the Romanian that I do for the London.
Apparently, when that film opened in Romania, the scenes where Gary Oldman speaks Romanian get howls of laughter. I mean, it apparently, if you are Romanian, that is like Peter Sellers doing an Indian accent levels of annoying.
Yeah. So wherever it plays, it's offending someone. The Coppola film. Well, Kim, it's been a delight to spend all this time picking your brain about Dracula. Cool. I mean, it's wonderful to hear that Daily Dracula is not going to end anytime soon.
No, when I started it during lockdown, I thought there's about 3 months in this.
And now you're in, you can't leave.
And now I'm in, it's like I'm always about 6 weeks ahead. And as long as I keep topping that up,
have you ever had a day off and have people complained or been like, "Well, are you okay?"
No, that's good. But eventually, of course, there'll be a power cut or something, and I won't be able to do it. But,
there's a person on Reddit who committed to cutting chives until they're perfect. And posting them, and every time he posts them, someone points out a chive that is sliced that is not quite accurate. And he was he was doing it for 60 odd days. I don't know if he's still he's trapped in this living hell that he's created for himself. So I hope that same fate doesn't befall you.
Yeah, I do too.
I mean, I don't think he likes or is engaged with chives as much as you have been in your life with Dracula. So I don't think there's any danger.
Well, that's probably a good thing.
Yeah. I would be interested to meet the person who was the chive, who dedicated their lives to chives. I mean, it is this guy, I think. So just to reiterate, you've got your new book out in, what's the date?
It's coming up soon. It's the 12th of May.
12th of May. So very soon around the release of this episode, I think. But
which incidentally will be the 11th of May is the anniversary of me starting Your Daily Dracula in 2020. So
wow. So what a week! If you got you'll have to have a special. Maybe that's the Sailor Moon post. Is the
maybe God, maybe
a better way to celebrate.
I've found those things on YouTube and I have downloaded them, so they are ready to be looked at.
Yeah, I think you need another lockdown in order to find the time to watch 12 hours of Sailor Moon.
Certainly, it was a lot easier in lockdown.
Yeah. All right, Kim. Well, thank you so much. It's been a real pleasure.
Thank you.
And
cool.
Take care and good luck with the book.
Thank you very much.
Okay, that's it for this week's Old Movies. My thanks to Kim, and once again, Model Actress Whatever is available now from all good bookstores. Just a couple of reminders before we go. On June the 19th, there's a screening of Le Cabinet and El Televisor at the Prince Charles Cinema with an introduction from Reece Shearsmith. That's to promote the upcoming Transmission Blu-ray release 2 boxes, Televised Terror in Franco's Spain. That's going to be a really fun night. Then on June the 20th, there is the Transmission All-Nighter at the Picture House Central in London, where we're going to be screening The Stuntman, Vampire's Kiss, Le Cabinet and El Televisor, Night of the Juggler, and a mystery film. I'm going to be hosting all night, so do please get your tickets and come along. Next week on Old Movies, I'm going to be talking to the curatorial director at the Criterion Collection, Ashley Clark, about one of the great unsung turn of the millennium British gangster movies, the Paul Bettany and Malcolm McDowell starring Gangster Number 1. So do join us for that. But for now, have a great week. Bye.